Alara lived a life of quiet ambition in a small American town, a world away from the glittering high society that often brushed past her. She was a diligent young woman, sharp and focused, always with a book in her hand, or a thought in her head about tomorrow. Her family wasn't rich, not by a long shot. Her mother, a woman of immense strength and silent sacrifice, worked as a maid for the wealthy Hawthorne family, cleaning their sprawling estate, polishing their antiques, and generally making their opulent lives run smoothly. Alara knew her place, but she also knew she wasn't destined to stay there. Her dreams were bigger than the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams of the Hawthorne mansion. She aced her classes, often spending hours in the Hawthorne's vast library, surrounded by books she could only dream of owning. The smell of old paper and leather was a comfort, a promise of a future where she could choose her own path, a future that felt 1,000,000 miles away from the quiet hum of her mother's vacuum cleaner. She imagined herself in college, then in a career, building something real, something that was her own. The Hawthornes were, in many ways, a world unto themselves. Their estate was a monument to old money and status. They threw parties that made the local newspapers. Their cars were always the newest models, and their vacations were to places Alara had only seen in magazines. Mrs. Hawthorne was usually polite, if a little distant, and Mr. Hawthorne was a busy, important man who rarely noticed the staff beyond a nod. Then there was Liam Hawthorne. He was the son, the heir, a young man who seemed to glide through life on a cloud of privilege. He was good-looking, charismatic in a careless sort of way, and completely, utterly oblivious to anyone outside his immediate circle. Alara and Liam's paths crossed sometimes, usually when she was leaving the library and he was coming in from a tennis game. He'd offer a quick, almost automatic smile, a polite gesture that held no real recognition. She was just the maid's daughter, a fixture in the background of his grand life. Their social standings were a canyon apart, a fact that was clear in every brief, silent exchange. She saw him as a symbol of the life she wanted to achieve, not a person she'd ever truly interact with. He saw her as, well, he probably didn't see her at all. One Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Alara was driving home from her part-time job, a shift at the local diner that helped pay for her college applications. The details of the accident were fuzzy, a blur of screeching tires, flashing lights, and then nothing. One moment, she was humming along to the radio, thinking about her upcoming exams. The next, her world exploded into a terrifying chaos. The car was mangled, twisted metal, and shattered glass. She was pulled from the wreckage, barely conscious, her body a canvas of pain. The doctors said it was bad. Very bad. Her mother received the call, a cold, clinical voice on the other end of the line delivering news that would shatter her world. Alara was in critical condition, fighting for her life. The car accident had left her with severe head trauma and internal injuries. The hospital became their second home. Her mother, already burdened by life, was completely devastated. The strong, quiet woman who had cleaned houses her whole life now sat by her daughter's bedside, her face etched with a grief too profound for words. The Hawthornes, hearing of the tragedy, extended their generosity, offering to cover some of the exorbitant medical bills. It was a kind gesture, a lifeline in a sea of despair, but it also felt impersonal, a transaction rather than true empathy. Alara slipped into a deep coma. Time became meaningless. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. The beeping of machines, the hushed voices of nurses, the sterile smell of the hospital room. These became the backdrop of her mother's existence, The medical team offered little hope. They spoke in low tones about brain activity, chances of recovery, and the possibility of Ilara never waking up. They prepared her mother for the worst, for a future where her bright, ambitious daughter might never open her eyes again. But her mother refused to give up. Every day she sat there, holding Ilara's hand, whispering stories, singing lullabies, clinging to the faint hope that her daughter would somehow hear her, somehow feel her presence, and fight her way back to them. The silence of the room was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator and her mother's quiet pleas. Months stretched into a seemingly endless expanse. Ilara remained trapped in her coma, a silent figure connected to a symphony of machines that hummed and beeped around her. Doctors had long since given up predicting a recovery, their initial grim prognoses now replaced by a quiet acceptance of the unknown. But her mother, a woman forged in resilience, never lost hope. She was a constant presence, a quiet sentinel by Ilara's bedside, her hand often resting gently on Ilara's arm, a silent promise that she was not alone. The Hawthorne family continued to provide financial assistance, covering the bulk of Ilara's escalating medical bills. It was a substantial sum, enough to keep Ilara in the best possible care, but her mother couldn't shake a nagging feeling about their generosity. It was helpful, yes, but it also felt detached, almost too easy. She wondered what their true motivations were, beyond simple charity. One morning, during a routine checkup, something unexpected happened. The medical team, performing their usual scans and tests to monitor Ilara's vital functions, noticed an anomaly. A doctor, a young woman with sharp eyes and a careful demeanor, paused at a monitor, her brow furrowed in concentration. She called over a colleague, pointing at a fuzzy image. A few minutes later, a small cluster of doctors and nurses surrounded the screen, their hushed voices growing louder with surprise. Ilara was pregnant. The news hit Ilara's mother like a physical blow. She was sitting in the small waiting area, sipping lukewarm coffee, when the doctor called her in. The words floated in the air, surreal and impossible. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the doctor began gently, "we have discovered something quite astonishing. Your daughter, Ilara, is pregnant." Her mother stared, unblinking, trying to process the information. Pregnant? How could that be? Ilara had been in a coma for months. She hadn't been awake, hadn't moved, hadn't... Her mind reeled, trying to connect the dots that simply weren't there. The medical team was just as baffled. They ran more tests, double-checked everything, but the results were undeniable. There was a tiny life growing inside Ilara. They couldn't explain it. It defied all logic, all medical understanding. Her mother felt a dizzying mix of shock, confusion, and a strange, almost terrifying joy. How could her comatose daughter be pregnant? The implications were overwhelming. She grappled with the impossible situation, her heart pounding in her chest. Who was the father? How had this happened? Her mind raced, searching for an explanation, any explanation, but found none. The news spread quickly through the hospital, traveling on hushed whispers and speculative glances. Nurses, doctors, even administrative staff. Everyone was talking about the comatose patient who was pregnant. It was a medical mystery, a bizarre anomaly that captured everyone's attention. Hospital authorities, recognizing the unprecedented nature of the situation, immediately initiated an internal investigation. They needed answers. The focus was on potential ethical breaches, on how such a thing could have occurred within their walls. Was it an unforeseen medical phenomenon, or something far more sinister? They interviewed staff, reviewed protocols, and meticulously checked every detail of Alara's care. Alara's mother, despite her own confusion, felt a fierce protectiveness rise within her. She shielded her daughter from the judgment she knew would come, from the questions and the whispers. Alara was vulnerable, and her mother was determined to protect her, even if she didn't understand what was happening. She sat by Alara's side, stroking her hand, whispering to her growing belly, a silent promise that she would find out the truth, no matter what. The hospital began to feel less like a place of healing and more like a maze of unanswered questions, each turn leading to more uncertainty. Her mother felt like she was walking a tightrope, balancing on the edge of a new reality, where everything she thought she knew was being challenged. The quiet routine of her vigil was shattered by this unbelievable revelation, replacing despair with a new kind of anxiety. She knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of a long and complicated journey. The weight of the unknown pressed down on her, heavy and constant. She looked at Alara, still and peaceful, and wondered what secrets her daughter's unconscious body held. The image of the tiny, developing life inside Alara was both a miracle and a terrifying enigma. The news, as shocking as it was, couldn't stay contained within the hospital walls for long. Whispers turned into murmurs, then into full-blown conversations, leaking out into the city like water through a cracked dam. Soon, it wasn't just hospital staff talking. It was local news outlets, then regional, and finally, national media. Alara's story became a sensational headline: Coma patient pregnant. Medical mystery or miracle? The media, always hungry for a dramatic story, latched onto it, turning Alara's tragedy into a spectacle. Reporters camped outside the hospital, desperate for a quote, a picture, anything to feed the public's insatiable curiosity. Alara's mother, already stretched thin by worry and confusion, now had to contend with a relentless onslaught of public scrutiny. She tried her best to shield Alara, to keep her daughter's fragile state from becoming a circus. She hung blankets over the windows, avoided the main entrances, and gave stern warnings to anyone who dared to speak about her daughter to outsiders. It felt like a constant battle, trying to protect Alara's dignity in the face of such overwhelming public interest. Liam Hawthorne, living in his own insulated world of wealth and privilege, eventually heard the rumors. At first, he dismissed them as absurd gossip, the kind of wild stories that circulated about the rich and powerful, or in this case, the unfortunate. He was too busy with his own life, his business deals, his social engagements, to pay much attention to the plight of a maid's daughter, even one who had worked in his own home. But the whispers persisted, growing louder, more specific. The maid's daughter, Alara, the one in the coma. She's pregnant. The name, Alara, started to echo in his mind, stirring something he couldn't quite place. He remembered her, vaguely. A quiet girl, always with a book, her nose buried in the Hawthorne Library's collection. He remembered seeing her around the house, a fleeting presence. The details of the story, especially the timing of the pregnancy, began to chip away at his indifference. He started to feel a strange unease, a flicker of recognition that he couldn't ignore. It was an unsettling feeling, like a distant memory struggling to surface. He found himself thinking about it more often than he cared to admit. The image of Alara, quiet and studious, clashing with the sensational news. Alara's mother, meanwhile, was wrestling with her own growing suspicions. The doctors had no explanation. The hospital investigation yielded nothing concrete. How could her daughter, who had been unconscious and unresponsive for months, become pregnant? The more she thought about it, the more illogical it seemed. Her mind began to retrace the days and weeks leading up to Alara's accident. Were there any strange occurrences? Any unusual visitors? She tried to recall every detail, every conversation. There was nothing obvious, no smoking gun, but a sense of unease settled over her. She remembered Alara being particularly tired in the days before the accident, a little withdrawn. She also recalled seeing Liam Hawthorne around the house more often, sometimes in the library, sometimes in the garden. He always seemed to be crossing paths with Alara. At the time, she'd thought nothing of it. Now, these vague memories took on a new, unsettling significance. Her motherly intuition, combined with the lack of a rational explanation, pushed her towards a darker conclusion. Foul play. It was the only thing that made sense, even if it was a terrifying thought. The hospital, caught in the eye of the media storm, was under immense pressure. Ethical boards were asking questions, demanding transparency and answers. The public was clamoring for details, some offering sympathy, others judgment. The hospital administration, desperate to protect its reputation, pushed its staff for any new information, any lead that could explain the bizarre situation. Alara's mother felt increasingly isolated. She was fighting against a wave of skepticism, a system that seemed more interested in damage control than in finding the truth for her daughter. She had no resources, no power, just her unwavering love for Alara. Every news report, every whispered comment, felt like a fresh wound. The mystery deepened with each passing day, and the path to understanding seemed to grow more obscure. She felt helpless, a small boat caught in a raging storm, with no land in sight. Her hope, which had been a quiet, steady flame, now flickered under the weight of the unanswered questions and the crushing pressure from the outside world. She would sit by Alara's bedside, holding her hand, willing her to wake up, to tell her what happened. The silence was deafening, filled only with her own racing thoughts and the constant hum of hospital machines. She knew she had to stay strong, not just for Alara, but for the tiny life that was now part of her daughter. The unknown was a heavy burden, but she carried it with a fierce determination. Refusing to give in to despair, she looked at Alara's peaceful face, a face that held so many secrets, and vowed to uncover every single one of them. The world outside might be loud and demanding, but in that quiet room, only one thing mattered: the truth. A glimmer of hope finally appeared after what felt like an eternity. Alara, after months of being in a deep, unresponsive coma, started showing small, subtle signs of neurological activity. Her eyelids would flutter almost imperceptibly, a slight twitch in her fingers, a faint change in her breathing pattern. The medical team, who had grown accustomed to the unchanging rhythm of her comatose state, noticed these shifts with cautious optimism. They ran more tests, adjusted her medication, and began preparing for the possibility of her awakening. Her mother, who had been a constant presence by Alara's bedside, felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. It was a feeling so intense, so overwhelming, that it momentarily pushed aside the despair and confusion that had become her constant companions. She held Alara's hand tighter, speaking to her in soft, encouraging whispers, telling her how much she was loved, how much they all missed her. Each flicker of movement, each subtle change, was a victory, a tiny step away from the abyss. Then, one morning, Alara slowly opened her eyes. The room was blurry, the faces around her indistinct. She was disoriented, weak, and utterly confused. She tried to speak, but her voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible. Her first clear interaction was with her mother, whose face was etched with both relief and profound sadness. Her mother held her close, tears streaming down her face, murmuring words of love and comfort. But amidst the relief, there was a heavy truth that needed to be shared. Gently, carefully, her mother began to explain. She told Alara about the accident, about the coma, and then, with a heavy heart, she delivered the shocking news. Alara was pregnant. Alara's reaction was one of profound shock and utter confusion. Her eyes, still hazy from the long sleep, widened in disbelief. Pregnant? How could that be? She had no memory of anything that could have led to such a thing. A deep sense of violation washed over her, an unsettling feeling of something having happened to her without her consent, without her knowledge. Her mind raced, trying to grasp the impossible reality. The emotional burden of this revelation was immense, weighing heavily on her already fragile state. She felt a profound disconnect from her own body, a sense of betrayal. Her body had been carrying a secret, a life, while her mind was lost in a void. The news felt like a cruel joke, a twisted nightmare from which she couldn't fully wake up. She looked at her mother, searching for answers, for understanding. But her mother's eyes only held sympathy and a shared bewilderment. Along with the shock of her pregnancy, Alara quickly realized she had significant memory loss. The period leading up to her accident and the accident itself were a complete blank. She struggled to recall specific events, conversations, or interactions from that time. It was as if a crucial chapter of her life had been erased, leaving a gaping void in her understanding of what had happened. She would lie in her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, desperately trying to piece together the fragments of her past. Occasionally, a flash of an image, a fleeting sound, or a vague sensation would surface in her mind, but they were always fleeting and confusing. A dark shadow, a hurried whisper, a strange sense of unease. These weren't clear memories, but more like echoes, indistinct and unsettling. She felt frustrated and helpless, unable to access the information that could explain her current predicament. The doctors told her it was common after a severe head injury, that her memories might return over time, but the uncertainty was agonizing. She needed to know. She needed to understand. The fact that someone else's life was now intertwined with hers, a life she knew nothing about, made the amnesia even more terrifying. She felt like a stranger in her own body, a vessel for a mystery she couldn't solve. The fragmented memories were like pieces of a puzzle, scattered in the dark, just out of reach, hinting at something important, something she desperately needed to remember. Liam Hawthorne couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at him since he first heard about Alara's pregnancy. It was more than just gossip. It was a series of unsettling coincidences that kept replaying in his mind. He started to piece together fragments of his own memories from the period before Alara's accident. There were those late nights at the mansion, the times he'd seen Alara in the library, studying. Sometimes he'd lingered, watching her, a strange mix of curiosity and something else he couldn't quite name. He remembered a specific night, a party at his parents' house, where he'd had too much to drink. Alara had been there, helping her mother. The details were hazy, blurred by alcohol and time, but a growing sense of dread started to consume him. He'd dismissed it then, just another drunken night, but now, with Alara pregnant and no memory, it felt different. It felt heavy. He decided he needed to talk to Alara's mother. He approached her at the hospital, putting on his most charming, concerned facade. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he began, his voice smooth and seemingly empathetic. I was so sorry to hear about Alara. My parents, of course, are doing everything they can to help. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, trying to sound genuinely worried. And this news about the baby, it's just so tragic. How is Alara doing, really? Is she remembering anything at all? He tried to sound casual, but his eyes darted around and searching for any sign, any hint. Alara's mother, however, was not easily fooled. She had known Liam since he was a boy, and she could see through his thinly veiled concern. She knew his family, their privilege, and their tendency to try and control situations. She answered his questions vaguely, her guard up. Alara is recovering. Thank you for asking, she said, her voice polite but firm. And no, her memory hasn't fully returned. It's a difficult time for her. She looked at him, her gaze steady, sensing his underlying motives, a predator circling its prey. Liam, frustrated by her evasiveness, dropped the pretense. He couldn't contain his suspicion any longer. Look, Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to be direct, he said, his tone shifting from fake concern to thinly disguised authority. The situation is complicated. Alara is pregnant, and she has no idea who the father is. And given certain circumstances, I need to know. I demand a DNA test. His words were cold, sharp, reflecting his privileged background and his expectation that his demands would be met without question. He saw it as a simple solution, a way to clear his name or confirm his fears, without considering the impact of his words on a woman who had just woken from a coma. Alara's mother was outraged. Her eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and disbelief. A DNA test? She repeated, her voice rising. How dare you? My daughter has just come out of a coma. She's fragile. And you come here demanding something so insensitive. What gives you the right? She couldn't believe the audacity, the sheer nerve of him. Her daughter's honor, her pain, none of it seemed to matter to him. All he cared about was himself, his reputation, his family name. She stood her ground, her small frame radiating a fierce protectiveness. Alara is a good girl. This is a tragedy, not some game for you to play with your money and your lawyers. The confrontation escalated quickly. Accusations and denials flew between them. I have my reasons, Mrs. Rodriguez, Liam insisted, his voice hardening. There are things that happened before the accident that make this necessary. I need to know the truth. He was convinced that she was hiding something, that Alara knew more than she was letting on. Alara's mother, however, was unwavering. She vehemently defended her daughter's honor and the sanctity of her situation. There is no truth for you to find, Mr. Hawthorne, other than the fact that my daughter is a victim. You want to accuse her? You want to drag her name through the mud while she's fighting for her life? She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not show weakness in front of him. Liam, however, remained insistent. He was driven by a desperate need to verify his growing fears, a gnawing suspicion that had taken root in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow involved, even if he couldn't fully remember how. The thought alone was enough to make him push for answers, no matter the cost to Alara or her mother. He needed to know, for his own peace of mind, and for the future of his family. The tension in the hospital corridor was thick, a silent battle waged between privilege and pain, between entitlement and a mother's fierce love. He knew he was being insensitive, but he couldn't help himself. The stakes, for him, felt too high. Alara heard about Liam's demand for a DNA test from her mother. The news hit her hard, a fresh wave of confusion and distress washing over her already fragile state. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. How could someone be so callous? She tried to push past the fog in her mind, desperately reaching for any memory that could explain this impossible situation. Why would he think it was his? The harder she tried, the more her head ached, and the more frustrated she became. She needed answers, not just for herself, but for the tiny life growing inside her. She felt like a puzzle with half its pieces missing, and everyone else seemed to have a clearer picture than she did. Her fragmented recollections, once just fleeting shadows, began to take on a little more substance. She saw flashes, quick images that didn't quite connect. A party, loud music, too many people, a familiar face but blurred. She tried to grasp it, to hold on to it, but it slipped away just as quickly. There was a sense of unease, a feeling of being out of place, of something not being right. These weren't clear memories, but rather sensations, feelings that lingered after the images faded. The more she focused, the more intense these partial memories became, hinting at hidden truths just beyond her reach. She knew there was something important, something she was missing. As Alara struggled to recall, she began to notice a recurring figure in these hazy flashbacks. Liam. Not just Liam from school, the one she barely spoke to, but a different Liam. A Liam who was closer, who was there in these unsettling encounters. These memories were still hazy, like looking through frosted glass, but they suggested a history between them. It was far more complicated than she had ever let herself imagine. She remembered his presence at some of the Hawthorne parties, events her mother often worked, and where Alara sometimes found herself, tucked away in a corner with a book, trying to be invisible. But in these new fragments, she wasn't invisible. There was a moment, a conversation, a look that lingered too long. The nature of these encounters was ambiguous, charged with an unsettling energy she couldn't quite place. Was it just her imagination, or had there always been something unspoken between them? Something she had deliberately ignored because of their different worlds? Her mother, meanwhile, was not idle. Liam's audacity had ignited a fierce resolve in her. She couldn't stand by while her daughter was subjected to such humiliation. With Alara's fragile state and Liam's cruel demand, she knew she had to act. She started her own discreet investigation, moving quietly through the hospital, talking to nurses, doctors, and even some of the cleaning staff. She asked careful questions, weaving around the main topic, trying to gather any information that might shed light on Alara's accident or the period leading up to it. She visited the Hawthorne estate again, not for work, but to subtly observe, to listen, to piece together any unusual occurrences. She spoke to other staff members, people who had been there for years, asking about any strange parties or late-night events that might have happened before Alara's accident. She uncovered small inconsistencies, whispers of strange events, and a few confirmed sightings of Liam being unusually present around Alara in the weeks before the crash. A gardener mentioned seeing Liam and Alara talking by the pool one evening, something he thought was odd at the time. A kitchen assistant recalled Liam being particularly agitated one night after a large party, and Alara being seen leaving the estate late. Bit by bit, both Alara and her mother began to connect the dots. The initial confusion that had shrouded Alara's pregnancy and accident slowly gave way to a dawning realization. The pieces started to fit together, forming a disturbing picture. It wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just a mysterious pregnancy. There was something more, something sinister lurking beneath the surface. The vague memories Alara had, combined with her mother's quiet digging, painted a picture of a potential betrayal, a manipulation that had led to Alara's current predicament. The outline of a disturbing truth slowly emerged from the shadows, a truth that was far more painful and complicated than either of them could have imagined. The weight of this realization was heavy, but it also brought a strange clarity. They weren't just fighting for Alara's recovery anymore. They were fighting for justice, for truth, and for the life of the innocent child Alara carried. The quiet battle had just begun, and this time, they were armed with more than just hope. The day the DNA test results arrived felt like a storm brewing. A thick, oppressive quiet settled over the hospital room. Alara, still weak but with a newfound strength in her eyes, sat up as much as she could. Her mother clutched the envelope, her knuckles white. The doctor, a kind woman, who had been with them through this whole ordeal, looked grim. There was no gentle way to say it. The results confirmed Liam Hawthorne's paternity. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. For Alara, it was a dizzying mix of validation and profound hurt. The vague fears, the unsettling memories, the questions that had haunted her for months, they all coalesced into an undeniable, painful truth. For her mother, it was a confirmation of her deepest suspicions, a raw wound of anger and sorrow. Liam, when he was finally informed, reacted with a mixture of disbelief and a flicker of something that looked like fear. He had been so sure, so arrogant in his demand for the test, convinced it would clear his name. Now, the cold, hard science stared him down, leaving no room for denial. The truth, finally out in the open, sent shockwaves not just through their small world, but threatened to ripple through the entire Hawthorne empire. No longer was it just a rumor, a maid's daughter with a mysterious pregnancy. It was real, documented, and tied directly to their privileged son. With the DNA confirmation, something inside Alara clicked. It was like a dam breaking. The pressure of the situation, the undeniable proof, unlocked the remaining pieces of her memory. The hazy fragments sharpened into vivid, horrifying detail. She remembered the night of her accident, not as a jumbled blur, but with chilling clarity. She remembered the Hawthorne estate, a party, the noise, the music, the feeling of being out of place. She remembered Liam, his charm, his persistence, his offer of a drink she shouldn't have taken. She remembered feeling woozy, disoriented, the world spinning. She recalled flashes of being led away, his words slurred and insistent. The dark room, the confusion, the fear. She remembered trying to push him away, her body feeling heavy and unresponsive. And then, the next thing she truly remembered was waking up in the hospital, months later, pregnant. The details exposed Liam's true nature. Reckless, predatory, and utterly devoid of concern for anyone but himself. The circumstances of her pregnancy were no longer a mystery. They were a cruel, calculated act. Cornered by the irrefutable evidence and facing the combined fury of Alara and her mother, Liam finally broke. His confession wasn't a heartfelt apology. It was a reluctant admission, riddled with excuses. He tried to minimize what he had done, to paint it as a misunderstanding, a drunken mistake. He mumbled about how he thought she was interested, how he was confused, how he didn't mean for any of this to happen. His words were hollow, his eyes darting, searching for an escape. He blamed the alcohol, the party, even Alara herself, subtly suggesting she had somehow led him on. But the full extent of his arrogance, his entitlement, and his complete disregard for Alara's well-being was laid bare. He couldn't hide behind his family name or his money anymore. The ugly truth of his actions hung in the air, undeniable and sickening. The emotional fallout was immense. Alara was devastated, not just by the physical violation, but by the profound betrayal. The man she had vaguely admired from a distance, the son of her mother's employer, had taken advantage of her in the cruelest way. The violation was compounded by the months of confusion, the public scrutiny, and the agonizing uncertainty. Her mother's anger, which had been simmering beneath the surface, now erupted. Her protective instincts, always strong, reached their peak. She looked at Liam with a cold fury that would have withered a lesser man. There were no words to express the depth of her rage, the pain she felt for her daughter. The Hawthorne family was forced to confront the dark side of their golden boy. Mr. Hawthorne, usually so composed, looked visibly shaken. Mrs. Hawthorne, who had always maintained a veneer of perfect civility, appeared to crumble. Their carefully constructed world of wealth and respectability was cracking under the weight of their son's depravity. The news, once contained, would inevitably spill out, bringing public scrutiny and potential legal ramifications they could not ignore. Their son's actions had not only shattered Alara's life, but had also stained their family name, exposing the rot beneath the polished surface. The quiet battle had ended, replaced by a much larger, much public war for justice. The quiet battle had ended, replaced by a much larger, much public war for justice. Alara and her mother, now united in their resolve, wasted no time. They decided to pursue legal action against Liam, a decision not made lightly, but with a fierce determination to see justice served. The legal proceedings were arduous, long, and emotionally draining, but they were steadfast. Every court appearance, every deposition, every moment of recounting the painful truth was a step forward, a testament to their unwavering spirit. Liam, stripped of his usual privileges and facing a barrage of undeniable evidence, found his world collapsing. The legal system, slow but ultimately firm, began to dismantle his carefully constructed reality. He faced severe consequences for his actions, both legally and socially. His privileged status, once his shield, now became a target, drawing even more scrutiny to his deplorable behavior. The public, fueled by media reports, turned on him, and his family's reputation, once pristine, was irrevocably tarnished. He was no longer the golden boy. He was simply a young man facing the full weight of his transgressions. While the legal battles raged, Alara focused intensely on her recovery, both physical and emotional. The ordeal had left deep scars, but she was determined not to let them define her. She found immense strength in her mother's unwavering support, a constant source of comfort and encouragement. Her mother, who had fought tirelessly by her side, was now her anchor, helping her navigate the choppy waters of healing. The prospect of her child, a life growing within her, became a powerful motivator. It was a tangible link to a future that, despite its painful origins, held the promise of unconditional love and a fresh start. Therapy and support groups played a crucial role in her healing process. She found solace in sharing her story with others who had faced similar traumas, realizing she was not alone. These sessions provided her with tools to process her pain, to reclaim her narrative, and to rebuild her self-worth. Each day brought a tiny step forward, a moment of peace, a flicker of hope. Slowly, deliberately, Alara began to embrace her unexpected motherhood with a courage and determination that surprised even herself. The initial shock and confusion gave way to a deep, protective love for the life growing inside her. She found purpose and immense joy in the anticipation of her baby, despite the painful circumstances of its conception. This child, her child, was innocent, deserving of all the love and care she could give. She started preparing for the baby's arrival, buying tiny clothes, decorating a small corner of her room, and immersing herself in books about parenting. The birth of her child, a healthy baby girl she named Hope, represented a profound new beginning. Hope was not a reminder of past pain, but a symbol of resilience, a living testament to Alara's strength and ability to overcome. Holding her daughter for the first time, Alara felt an overwhelming surge of love that washed away much of the bitterness and fear. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a powerful affirmation of life. With Hope in her arms, Alara began to build a new life for herself, one completely independent of the Hawthorns' influence. The settlement from the legal case, substantial but hard-won, provided her with the financial stability she needed to pursue her dreams. She enrolled in a community college, balancing her studies with motherhood, determined to create a secure future for her daughter. Her academic drive, which had been temporarily derailed, returned with renewed vigor. She excelled in her classes, proving to herself and to the world that her intelligence and ambition remained intact. Her experience, though traumatic, transformed her. She realized she had a unique perspective, a powerful story that could help others. She began to volunteer at local shelters for women who had experienced similar violations, becoming a voice for justice and a beacon of hope for those who felt lost and alone. Alara's story, once a tale of quiet suffering, became one of triumph over adversity. She spoke at conferences, shared her journey, and inspired countless individuals to speak up, to seek help, and to fight for their rights. She proved that even in the darkest of times, strength can be found, and new beginnings are always possible. She showed everyone that resilience isn't about avoiding pain, but about facing it head-on and emerging stronger. Her life, once defined by the actions of another, was now hers, forged in strength, courage, and an unwavering belief in a brighter tomorrow. She was no longer just the maid's daughter. She was Alara, a survivor, a mother, an advocate, and a living testament to the indomitable power of the human spirit. Her daughter, Hope, grew up knowing she was loved, cherished, and the center of a world built on strength and justice, a world her mother had bravely fought to create. Alara grew up in a small house, not far from the grand estate where her mother worked. Her mother was a maid for the wealthy Hawthorne family, a job that paid the bills but offered little else. Alara understood their place in the world, but she never let it define her. She was a diligent, ambitious young woman, with dreams that stretched far beyond their modest means. Every day after school, she'd head straight for the one place that felt like hers, the Hawthorne family library. It was a vast room, filled with books that smelled of old paper and quiet ambition. She'd sit tucked away in a corner, surrounded by stories and knowledge, imagining a future where she, too, could build something great. The Hawthorns lived a life Alara only saw in movies. Their house was enormous, with manicured lawns and cars that gleamed in the sunlight. Mrs. Hawthorne was usually kind, in a distant way, and Mr. Hawthorne was rarely seen. But it was Liam Hawthorne, their son, who often crossed Alara's path. He was charismatic, yes, with an easy smile that could charm anyone, but also arrogant. He moved through the world as if he owned it, often oblivious to the people who kept his world running, including Alara. Their interactions were brief, usually just a nod, or a quick, almost dismissive glance. He was the golden boy. She was the maid's daughter. Their social standings were miles apart, a chasm that felt impossible to cross. Ilara was on her way home from a late study session at the community college when it happened. The details were fuzzy, even later. A sudden glare of headlights, the screech of tires, then a crushing impact. When she woke up, she was in a hospital bed, surrounded by tubes and machines. But then she didn't wake up. Not really. She was in and out, flashes of light and sound, but mostly just darkness. The accident had been severe, leaving her in a critical condition. Her mother, Maria, was devastated. Ilara was her only child, her hope, her future. Maria spent every spare moment at the hospital, her face etched with worry. The Hawthorns, hearing about the accident, offered financial help. It was a gesture of generosity, Maria knew, but it also felt like a reminder of their different worlds. They could afford to help. Maria could barely afford the bus fare to the hospital. The days blurred into weeks, then months. Ilara was in a deep coma, her young life hanging by a thread. The doctors weren't optimistic. They spoke in hushed tones about brain damage and long-term care. Maria refused to give up. She sat by Ilara's bedside, day after day, week after week, talking to her daughter, reading to her, holding her hand. She told Ilara about her day, about the little things, hoping that some part of her daughter could hear her. The medical staff, though kind, couldn't offer much hope. They prepared Maria for the worst, gently suggesting she start thinking about difficult decisions. But Maria couldn't. She just couldn't. Every breath Ilara took, every flicker of a machine, was a sign of life, a reason to keep believing. The hospital became their second home, a place of quiet despair and unwavering hope. Maria watched other families come and go, some celebrating recoveries, others leaving with empty eyes. She prayed that Ilara would be one of the lucky ones, that her strong, intelligent daughter would somehow find her way back to her. The silence of the room was often broken only by the soft beeping of machines and Maria's whispered prayers. She remembered Ilara's laugh, her quick wit, the way she would get lost in a book. It all felt so far away now, so fragile. The weight of it all was immense, a heavy blanket of fear and sorrow that never quite lifted. Yet beneath it all, a tiny spark of defiance remained. Maria would not let her daughter go. Not yet. Not ever. Months crawled by, each one blurring into the next. Yet Ilara remained in her coma. The doctors had long since stopped giving Maria any real hope, but Maria refused to let go. She was there every single day, a constant presence by Ilara's bedside. She talked to her daughter, read to her, even played Ilara's favorite music, always holding on to the slim chance that some part of Ilara could hear her, could feel her presence. Maria believed in Ilara's strength, a strength she knew ran deep within her daughter. The Hawthorne family continued to provide financial assistance for Ilara's medical care. It was a lot of money, more than Maria could ever imagine earning, and it made her wonder sometimes. Why were they so generous? Was it just kindness, or was there something else? Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She tried not to think about it too much, focusing instead on Ilara. One morning, the quiet routine of the hospital room was broken. A new doctor, Dr. Evans, came in, looking a bit flustered. He explained that during a routine checkup, something unexpected had come up. He spoke carefully, choosing his words, but Maria could tell something was wrong. Then he dropped the bomb. Ilara was pregnant. Maria felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Pregnant? How could that be? Ilara had been in a coma for months. It was impossible. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. She looked at Ilara, still and pale in the bed, then back at the doctor. He looked just as confused as she felt. The medical team was baffled, he admitted. They had no explanation. It defied everything they knew. Maria was overwhelmed. She couldn't process the information. Her comatose daughter was pregnant. It was a nightmare, a cruel joke. She asked Dr. Evans again and again, "Are you sure? How?" He could only shake his head, confirming the tests, confirming the impossible reality. Maria felt a wave of nausea. Who could have done this? How could anyone do this? The thought made her blood run cold. She looked at Ilara, her innocent daughter, lying there, vulnerable. Maria felt a fierce protectiveness rise up within her. This wasn't just about Ilara anymore. It was about the life growing inside her. The news, despite the hospital's efforts to keep it quiet, began to spread. Whispers followed Maria down the hallways. Nurses and other staff members looked at her with a mix of pity and curiosity. Maria felt like she was living in a bad dream, a public spectacle. The hospital authorities quickly initiated an internal investigation. Dr. Evans explained that they had to. It was a highly unusual and deeply concerning situation. They needed to understand how this could have happened. Was it a medical error? A terrible, unthinkable crime? The focus was on potential ethical breaches, on how someone could have taken advantage of Ilara's vulnerable state. Maria felt a growing anger. Her daughter was not a case study. She was a person, a victim. Maria's protectiveness only intensified. She spoke to the hospital administrators, demanding answers, demanding protection for Ilara. She shielded her daughter from the prying eyes, from the whispered judgments. She knew what people would think, what they would say. She had to be Ilara's voice, her shield. The hospital became a place of tension. The doctors and nurses, usually so calm and professional, seemed on edge. Everyone was talking about Ilara, about the impossible pregnancy. Maria tried to block it out, to focus only on Ilara's well-being. She spoke to lawyers, trying to understand their options, what rights Ilara had. It was a maze of legal terms and medical jargon, and Maria felt lost, but she kept pushing. She knew she had to be strong, not just for Ilara, but for the tiny life inside her. This wasn't just about Ilara waking up. It was about justice, about finding out who was responsible. The weight of it all was immense, but Maria found a new kind of strength, a maternal ferocity she hadn't known she possessed. She watched Ilara, her heart aching, and promised her silent daughter that she would fight for her, no matter what. She would find the truth. She would make sure whoever did this paid for it. The hospital was a sterile, impersonal place. But for Maria, it had become a battlefield where she fought for her daughter's dignity and future. Every day was a struggle, every night a silent vigil. The mystery of the pregnancy hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud over Ilara's unconscious form. Maria felt isolated, dealing with this unbelievable situation almost entirely alone. She had to be strong for both of them, and for the baby that was now a part of Ilara. The whispers about Ilara's miraculous and controversial pregnancy eventually leaked beyond the hospital walls. It was inevitable, Maria knew. A story this strange, this unbelievable, couldn't be kept under wraps forever. The hospital's attempts at discretion were quickly overwhelmed by the sheer bizarreness of the situation. Soon, local news outlets started picking up on the story, initially with vague, anonymous reports, then with more direct inquiries. Maria found herself battling not just the emotional toll of Ilara's condition, but also the relentless intrusion of the media. Reporters, photographers, and even curious onlookers began to stake out the hospital, hoping for a glimpse of the miracle coma mother or her distraught parent. Maria felt a deep, chilling dread. Her daughter, vulnerable and unconscious, was becoming a spectacle, a sensational headline. She tried to protect Alara from this public scrutiny, often arguing with hospital security to keep reporters away, pulling the blinds in Alara's room, and even changing her visiting hours to avoid the growing circus outside. She felt a profound violation, as if Alara's privacy, already breached in the most unthinkable way, was now being stripped away completely. Liam Hawthorne heard the news through the grapevine, initially dismissing it as just another piece of absurd gossip. He was used to rumors swirling around his family, their wealth often attracting all sorts of ridiculous stories. When his friends first mentioned the maid's daughter and the coma pregnancy, he just laughed it off. "Come on," he'd said. "That sounds like something out of a bad movie." But the details kept coming, and they were specific. Alara, the quiet girl who sometimes studied in his family's library, the car accident, the coma, and then the pregnancy. The timing of it all began to unsettle him. He tried to brush it aside, but a tiny flicker of unease, a nagging thought he couldn't quite place, started to surface in his mind. He found himself thinking about Alara more often, remembering her quiet presence, her focused intensity. He remembered seeing her around the house, always respectful, almost invisible, but undeniably there. The news, once dismissed as fiction, now felt a little too real, a little too close to home. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. Maria, meanwhile, felt her initial shock slowly morph into a cold, hard suspicion. She struggled to reconcile the facts, to make sense of what had happened. Alara had been in a coma. How could this be? She started replaying the days and weeks before Alara's accident in her mind, searching for any clue, any sign. Had there been anything unusual? Any strange occurrences? She remembered a few times seeing Liam Hawthorne around the house late at night, sometimes after Alara had been studying. She remembered brief, almost imperceptible interactions between them. Nothing concrete, but enough to make her wonder. Alara had always been so careful, so dedicated to her studies. The idea of her being involved with anyone, especially someone like Liam, seemed completely out of character. But then again, a pregnancy under these circumstances was also completely out of character. Her suspicions, once vague, began to solidify, fueled by the lack of any clear, logical explanation for the pregnancy. The more she thought, the more a dark possibility began to take shape in her mind, a possibility she desperately wanted to deny. The hospital, caught in the eye of the media storm, started to face immense pressure from both the press and various ethical boards. They demanded answers, transparent investigations, and a clear explanation for this unprecedented situation. The internal investigation, initially a quiet affair, was now under intense scrutiny. Maria felt isolated and increasingly helpless, battling against a system that seemed overwhelmed and unable to offer the solace or the answers she so desperately needed. Doctors and administrators gave her sympathetic looks, but they had no solutions, no easy explanations. The whole situation felt like a cruel joke, a mystery deepening with every passing day, with no clear path to understanding the truth. Each new headline, each new reporter at the hospital entrance, chipped away at Maria's dwindling hope for a peaceful resolution. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of questions, with no one to throw her a lifeline. The mystery of Alara's pregnancy became a heavy, suffocating blanket, covering everything, making it impossible to breathe normally. Maria knew she had to find the truth, not just for Alara, but for herself, to reclaim some sense of control in a situation that had spiraled wildly out of control. She spent countless hours by Alara's bedside, holding her hand, whispering promises that she would uncover what happened, that justice would be served. The silence of the room was often broken only by the beeping of machines, a constant reminder of Alara's fragile state. Maria's resolve hardened with each passing day. She would not rest until she understood how her daughter, lying in a coma, had become pregnant. The thought of someone taking advantage of Alara when she was helpless, vulnerable, filled Maria with a rage she hadn't known she possessed. She looked at her daughter, pale and still, and vowed to find out. The world outside was spiraling with gossip and speculation, but inside that hospital room, Maria was waging a silent war for truth and justice. After months of agonizing waiting, a flicker of hope finally appeared. Alara, who had been lying still and unresponsive for so long, began to show subtle signs of neurological activity. A slight twitch of her fingers, a faint flutter of her eyelids, movements that were barely perceptible, but enough to make the medical team pause and take notice. The doctors, who had offered little more than grim prognostics for so long, now spoke with cautious optimism. They ran more tests, adjusted her medication, and started preparing for what they hoped would be her eventual recovery. Maria, Alara's mother, felt a wave of relief so profound it almost brought her to her knees. Her joy was palpable, a stark contrast to the despair that had been her constant companion for so many months. She spent even more hours by Alara's bedside, talking to her, reading to her, willing her to come back. Every small scene of progress felt like a miracle, a direct answer to her endless prayers. Then, one morning, it happened. Alara slowly, painstakingly, emerged from her coma. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. She looked around the sterile hospital room, her brow furrowed, trying to make sense of her surroundings. She was weak, disoriented, and clearly struggled to comprehend the passage of time. Maria was there, of course, holding her hand, tears streaming down her face. "Alara, my darling, you're awake," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Alara tried to speak, but only a raspy sound came out. It took days for her to regain enough strength to form coherent words, to understand where she was and what had happened. The doctors explained the accident, the coma, the long months she had been unconscious, but then came the harder part. Maria, with a heavy heart and a gentle voice, had to break the news of her pregnancy. Alara's reaction was one of profound shock and utter confusion. Her eyes widened, and a look of disbelief spread across her pale face. "Pregnant?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How? I don't remember." A deep sense of violation washed over her, a feeling of being betrayed by her own body and her own memory. She couldn't grasp how something so significant could have happened without her knowledge, without her consent. The emotional burden of this revelation was immense, weighing heavily on her already fragile state. She was still weak, still recovering, and now this impossible truth was thrust upon her. She cried, not just from the physical pain of her recovery, but from the overwhelming emotional distress. Maria tried to comfort her, holding her close, but there were no easy answers, no comforting words that could truly explain the inexplicable. As Alara slowly regained her strength, it became clear that she had significant memory loss, particularly concerning the period leading up to and including her accident. She struggled to recall specific events, conversations, or interactions from those crucial weeks. It was as if a large chunk of her life had been erased, leaving a crucial, terrifying gap in her understanding of what had transpired. She would try to concentrate, her forehead creasing with effort, but the memories remained elusive. Sometimes, though, a flash would occur, a fleeting image, a sound, a feeling. These fragmented memories were confusing, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. She would see a glimpse of a familiar face, hear a snippet of a conversation, or feel a sudden surge of fear, but they would vanish as quickly as they appeared, leaving her more frustrated than before. One afternoon, while trying to piece things together with her mother, Alara mentioned a faint, unsettling memory. "I remember a party at the Hawthorns' house before the accident." Her voice was weak, trailing off. "And Liam was there. He was talking to me." Maria's heart pounded. She hadn't been able to get a clear account of the night of the accident, only that Alara had been found on a remote road. Now, this small detail, this mention of Liam, sent a chill down her spine. "What did he say, darling?" Maria asked, trying to keep her voice steady, not wanting to scare Alara away from these fragile recollections. Alara closed her eyes, trying to concentrate. "I don't know. It's fuzzy, but I felt uncomfortable." She paused, a shiver running through her. "He was very persistent, and I remember feeling like I needed to get away." These were not concrete facts, but they were more than they had before. Maria kept pressing gently, trying to help Alara unlock more. "Did you see him often, Alara, before the accident?" Alara shook her head slowly. "Not really. Just sometimes, in the library, or sometimes if I was leaving, he'd be coming in. He'd always say something, always try to talk." The fragments were slowly, painfully coming together. A party, Liam. A feeling of discomfort. Persistent attention. It wasn't enough to explain the pregnancy, not yet, but it was a thread, a single, thin thread that Maria could follow. She knew that Liam Hawthorne was known for his charm, but also for his arrogance and his disregard for others, especially those he considered beneath him. The idea that he might have taken advantage of Alara in her moment of vulnerability, or even before the accident, was a horrifying thought, but it was a thought that was becoming harder and harder to dismiss. Alara's amnesia was a cruel barrier, protecting her from the full truth, but also preventing them from finding the answers they so desperately needed. Maria looked at her daughter, so young and vulnerable, and a fierce determination burned within her. She would find out what happened, no matter what it took. The whispers, the accusations, the media frenzy, none of it mattered as much as uncovering the truth for Alara. She knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey, but she was ready. She had to be. Liam Hawthorne couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The news about Alara's pregnancy, while she was in a coma, had felt unreal, like something out of a bad movie. But as the days turned into weeks and the whispers around town grew louder, the coincidences started stacking up. He found himself replaying moments in his head, little interactions with Alara he had barely registered at the time. Her quiet presence in the library, the way she would sometimes avoid his gaze, the few times he'd tried to talk to her, and she'd politely but firmly cut the conversation short. He remembered the party, the one Alara had vaguely recalled. He remembered seeing her there, looking out of place, almost like a ghost among the glittering crowd. And he remembered drinking too much, pushing boundaries, feeling that familiar sense of entitlement that came with his name and his family's money. A cold knot started to form in his stomach. He tried to dismiss it, to tell himself it was impossible. Alara was the maid's daughter, practically invisible. He had countless women throwing themselves at him. Why would he ever look twice at her? But the memory of her quiet dignity, even when he was being his most arrogant self, kept nagging at him. The thought that he might be connected to this impossible situation, to this baby, started to fill him with a dread he hadn't known before. It wasn't just about Alara. It was about his reputation, his future, everything he had carefully built. This could ruin him. He knew he needed to get to the bottom of it, but he couldn't just barge in. He decided to approach Alara's mother, Maria, under the guise of concern. He found her at the hospital, looking tired but resolute, her eyes never leaving Alara's still form. "Maria," he began, his voice surprisingly soft, a practiced tone he used when he wanted something. "I heard about Alara. I'm so sorry. My family and I are all thinking of her." Maria turned, her gaze sharp, instantly wary. She had seen through his kind words before. "Thank you, Liam. She's making progress." "That's good to hear," he said, stepping closer, trying to appear genuinely empathetic. "And the other news. It's quite incredible, isn't it? A miracle, some are saying." He paused, watching her reaction carefully. "Do they have any idea how it happened? Who the father might be?" Maria's jaw tightened. She knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't there to offer comfort. He was there to pry, to gather information for his own benefit. "The doctors are still investigating, Liam. It's a very sensitive time for Alara and for me." Liam pressed on, his facade beginning to crack. "Of course sensitive, but surely there must be some leads. Alara was... well, she was out and about before the accident, wasn't she? Did she have a boyfriend? Someone she was seeing?" He tried to make it sound casual, but his voice had an edge of desperation. Maria stared at him, her eyes narrowing. "Alara was a good girl, Liam. She spent most of her time studying or helping me. She didn't have time for boyfriends." Her voice was low but firm, a clear warning. He ignored it. The knot in his stomach was twisting tighter. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "Look, Maria, I need to be direct. There's a lot of talk going around. And, well, I know I was at the party that night. I know I saw Alara, and I was a little out of it." He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I need to know. I need a DNA test to rule myself out, if nothing else." The words hung in the air, heavy and offensive. Maria felt a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. How dare he? How dare he come here, to Alara's bedside, and make such a vile suggestion? "A DNA test," she repeated, her voice rising, losing its careful control. "Are you accusing my daughter? Are you implying that she would lie? Or that you did something to her?" Liam held up his hands, a nervous gesture. No, I'm not accusing anyone. I'm just saying, for everyone's peace of mind, for Alara's peace of mind, when she's fully recovered, it's the logical step, isn't it? To know who the father is." His words, meant to sound reasonable, only fueled Maria's anger. "Logical," she scoffed, stepping closer to him, her eyes blazing. "You think this is logical? My daughter is lying in that bed, just waking up from a coma, pregnant with a child she has no memory of, and you come here demanding a DNA test like she's some kind of criminal? You think that's logical, Liam? Or is it just convenient for you?" The confrontation escalated quickly. Maria's voice, though kept to a harsh whisper so as not to disturb Alara, was filled with raw emotion. "You think you can just walk in here with your money and your arrogance and make demands? My daughter has been through hell, and you want to add this to her suffering?" Liam, for his part, remained insistent, though he looked increasingly uncomfortable under Maria's fierce gaze. He was used to people cowering, not fighting back with such intensity. "It's not about convenience, Maria. It's about truth. It's about knowing. And if it's not me, then we can all move on. But if it is, well, then we need to deal with that." His fear was palpable now, overriding any attempt at feigned concern. He needed to verify his growing fears, to either confirm them or put them to rest. The possibility that he could be the father of Alara's child, the maid's daughter, was a threat to everything he was. He couldn't let it hang over him. Maria just shook her head, tears of frustration and anger welling in her eyes. The insensitivity, the sheer audacity of him, left her speechless. This was only the beginning, she knew. This demand for a DNA test was not just an accusation. It was a battle cry. Hearing about Liam's demand, Alara was deeply distressed. The words, relayed by her mother in hushed, angry tones, felt like a fresh wound on her already fragile state. A DNA test? The phrase echoed in her mind, cold and clinical, reducing her impossible situation to a biological equation. She desperately tried to unlock her lost memories, feeling a desperate need for answers. Her head throbbed with the effort, a dull ache behind her eyes that intensified with every fruitless attempt to grasp at the swirling fog in her mind. She needed to remember, not just for herself, but for her mother, and for the life growing inside her. Her fragmented recollections became more intense, hinting at hidden truths. Sometimes, a flash of light, too bright. Other times, a snippet of music, loud and distorted. And then, a face. Liam's face. Not the stern, demanding face her mother described, but a younger, more carefree version, blurred around the edges like a half-forgotten dream. These were not clear memories, but rather unsettling sensations, like déjà vu mixed with a growing sense of dread. She would close her eyes, trying to focus, to pull these wisps of memory into something solid, but they always slipped away, leaving her more frustrated than before. The more she tried, the more her mind felt like a tangled mess of wires, sparking sporadically but refusing to connect. As Alara's memory slowly returned, she began to recall brief, unsettling encounters with Liam. These were not the polite, distant acknowledgments exchanged between the maid's daughter and the master's son. No, these were different. She remembered being in the Hawthorne Library, late at night, studying. The house was usually quiet then, her mother long gone home. But sometimes Liam would appear. He'd be heading to the kitchen for a late-night snack or coming in from a party. He'd linger, sometimes making a casual comment about her books, sometimes just watching her, with an unreadable expression. These memories were hazy, like scenes from a dream she couldn't quite grasp, but they suggested a hidden history between them, far more complicated than she initially realized. One specific memory kept resurfacing, a quick, sharp image. Liam, leaning against a bookshelf, a half smile on his face, holding a glass. He wasn't overtly friendly, but there was an intensity in his gaze that had always made her uncomfortable. She remembered feeling a prickle of unease, a sense that he saw her differently than he did other people. The nature of these encounters was ambiguous, adding to the mystery. Had he been flirting? Or was it something more predatory? She couldn't tell. Her mind was a sieve, letting most of the details slip through, leaving only the emotional residue of discomfort and confusion. Ilara's mother, Maria, was now more determined than ever. Liam's audacity had ignited a fire in her, transforming her grief and worry into a fierce resolve. She started her own discreet investigation. Maria knew the Hawthorne household inside and out. She knew the staff, the rhythms of the house, the little secrets that people thought they kept hidden. She started by talking to the other maids, the gardeners, anyone who might have seen something unusual in the weeks leading up to Ilara's accident. She framed her questions carefully, pretending to be concerned about Ilara's recovery, subtly steering conversations towards Liam and his activities. She gathered information from hospital staff too, though they were more guarded. A nurse mentioned seeing Liam visit Ilara's room a couple of times early in her coma, before the pregnancy was discovered. He seemed concerned, the nurse had said, but also a little agitated. Maria filed that away. Why would he be agitated if he was just concerned? She spoke to Ilara's few friends, asking about her social life, her routines. Most of it was innocent, typical of a diligent student, but one friend mentioned a party. A big one at the Hawthorne estate, a few weeks before the accident. Ilara had been there, reluctantly, at her mother's insistence to get out a little. The friend remembered seeing Ilara talking to Liam for a surprisingly long time. Maria uncovered small inconsistencies and strange events related to Liam's presence around Ilara. The night of the party, Ilara had come home unusually late, looking pale and quiet. She dismissed it as being tired, but now Maria wondered. Had something happened that night? Had Liam been more involved than anyone knew? She remembered finding one of Ilara's favorite hair clips, a small distinctive one, tucked under a cushion in the Hawthorne living room, a few days before the accident. Ilara was always so careful with her things. Why would it be there? It was a tiny detail, easily dismissed at the time, but now it felt significant. A misplaced piece of a puzzle. Both Ilara and her mother began to connect the dots, realizing there was more to the story than just the accident. Ilara's fragmented memories of Liam's lingering presence, his intense gaze, combined with Maria's quiet digging, started to paint a picture. The initial confusion gave way to a dawning realization of a potential betrayal or manipulation. The pieces weren't fully in place yet, but the outline of a disturbing truth slowly emerged from the shadows. Maria remembered the subtle shifts in Liam's behavior towards Ilara in the weeks before the accident. A possessiveness she hadn't recognized then, but now, looking back, felt chillingly clear. He'd sometimes ask about Ilara, not just as the maid's daughter, but with a specific, almost proprietary interest. Ilara, too, felt a cold knot forming in her stomach as more fragments surfaced. She remembered the feeling of being watched, the way Liam's presence could fill a room even when he wasn't speaking. She recalled an instance where he had touched her arm, a fleeting touch that had made her pull away instinctively. At the time, she'd simply thought he was being overly familiar, but now the memory sent a shiver down her spine. The accident itself, the blur of headlights and screeching tires, still remained a blank, but the events leading up to it were slowly, painfully, coming into focus. The demand for a DNA test, which had initially felt like an insult, now felt like a desperate attempt by Liam to control a narrative he knew was slipping away. It was no longer just about Ilara's pregnancy. It was about uncovering a truth that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. The day the DNA test results arrived, the hospital corridor felt strangely quiet, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Maria clutched the envelope, her knuckles white. Ilara sat beside her, her gaze fixed on the sterile white walls, her heart hammering against her ribs. The doctor, a kind but weary woman, entered the room, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to say anything. The weight of the moment hung heavy between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, confirming what both Ilara and Maria had increasingly feared. The results were clear. Liam Hawthorne was the father. The revelation hit Ilara like a physical blow. A wave of nausea washed over her, and she had to grip the armrest to steady herself. It wasn't just the confirmation of paternity. It was the final, undeniable proof that her fragmented memories were real. The truth, stark and brutal, settled in her bones. For Liam, the news was a different kind of shock. He had expected the test to clear his name, to prove his fleeting, arrogant suspicion wrong. Instead, he was faced with the irrefutable evidence of his involvement, a responsibility he could no longer sidestep. The confirmation sent shockwaves through both families, forcing them to confront an undeniable truth that shattered their comfortable realities. Liam, for the first time, seemed genuinely unnerved. The easy confidence he usually carried, replaced by a flicker of panic. With the DNA confirmation, a dam burst within Ilara's mind. The pressure, the undeniable proof, somehow unlocked the last pieces of the puzzle. Her memories, once fragmented and hazy, now flooded back with terrifying clarity. She remembered the party at the Hawthorne estate, the one her friend had mentioned. She remembered feeling out of place, trying to avoid attention. She remembered Liam approaching her, his charm a thin veneer over something more insistent. He had offered her a drink, strong and sweet, and she remembered feeling lightheaded quickly, much too quickly. The rest of the night was a blur of confusion, of being led away, of his insistent touch, her whispered protests that seemed to fade into the opulent silence of the house. She remembered waking up in an unfamiliar room, disoriented and scared, her clothes disheveled. Liam had been there, looking down at her, his expression unreadable. He had dismissed her confusion, told her she'd had too much to drink, and then quickly ushered her out, making her promise not to say anything. He had even offered her money, a small, insulting sum, to ensure her silence. She had been too ashamed, too confused, too scared to process it fully, pushing it deep down, trying to convince herself it was just a bad dream, a misunderstanding. Then came the accident, wiping away any conscious memory of that night, leaving only a lingering sense of unease. Now it all made a terrible, sickening sense. The details exposed Liam's reckless and predatory behavior, confirming the true circumstances of her pregnancy. Cornered, with the DNA results undeniable, and Ilara's now fully restored memories laid bare, Liam finally had to confess. His initial response was a pathetic attempt to deflect, to minimize. He still tried to spin it, saying she had been willing, that she had flirted with him. But his voice lacked its usual conviction, cracking under the weight of the evidence. Maria, her eyes blazing, cut him off, detailing the timeline, the inconsistencies, the hidden hair clip, the nurse's observation. She described Ilara's state after the party, her subsequent amnesia, the sheer violation of what he had done. Liam's confession was reluctant, filled with pathetic excuses and attempts to shift blame, but it was a confession nonetheless. He muttered about being drunk, about not remembering clearly, about a misunderstanding. The full extent of his arrogance and utter disregard for Ilara's well-being was finally laid bare for everyone to see. He was not just a privileged young man who made a mistake. He was a predator who had taken advantage of a vulnerable young woman, then allowed her to suffer in silence. Even after her horrific accident, Alara was devastated by the truth. It was one thing to suspect, another to have it confirmed so brutally. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. She grappled with the violation, the sense that her body, her life, had been irrevocably altered by someone else's selfish actions. Her mother's anger and protective instincts reached their peak. Maria had been a quiet, dignified woman her whole life, but the fury that burned in her eyes now was fierce and unwavering. She looked at Liam, not with fear, but with a cold, righteous anger that promised retribution. The Hawthorne family, once a bastion of untouchable wealth and influence, was now forced to confront the dark side of their son. Mr. Hawthorne, usually so composed, looked pale and shaken. Mrs. Hawthorne, who had always maintained an air of superiority, seemed to shrink under the weight of the scandal. They faced public scrutiny, the whispers turning into shouts, and the very real threat of legal ramifications. Their carefully constructed world was crumbling around them, exposed by the truth that had finally clawed its way to the surface. The emotional fallout was immense, a heavy cloud settling over everyone involved. But for Alara, it was also a strange kind of liberation. The truth, however painful, had finally set her free from the suffocating confusion and uncertainty. Alara and her mother, Maria, decided to pursue legal action against Liam. It was not an easy decision. The Hawthorne family, despite their son's confession, initially tried to protect him, offering Alara a substantial sum of money to drop the case and sign a non-disclosure agreement. They painted it as a way to avoid public humiliation for everyone involved, especially for Alara and her unborn child. But Maria, fueled by a mother's rage and a deep sense of injustice, refused. She told them that no amount of money could erase what Liam had done, and that justice was more important than their family's reputation. Alara, though still recovering from the emotional shock, found strength in her mother's resolve. She knew this was bigger than just her. It was about holding powerful people accountable. The legal proceedings were arduous, just as the Hawthornes had warned. Their lawyers were aggressive, trying to paint Alara as an opportunist, and even attempting to discredit her mother's testimony. They brought up Alara's humble background, suggesting she was looking for a handout, and questioned the timing of her recovered memories. But Alara, guided by a strong legal team that Maria had painstakingly found, stood firm. She recounted every detail, her voice clear and unwavering, even when it was painful. Maria, too, testified with quiet dignity, her words carrying the weight of years of silent service, and now righteous anger. The evidence, especially the DNA results and the detailed medical records of Alara's coma and awakening, was undeniable. Liam, stripped of his usual confidence, crumbled under cross-examination. His attempts to justify his actions or minimize his culpability fell flat. The court saw through his arrogance and entitlement. Liam faced severe consequences for his actions. The judge, swayed by the gravity of the assault and the profound impact on Alara's life, handed down a sentence that shocked the privileged circles he moved in. He was found guilty of sexual assault and sentenced to a significant prison term. Beyond the legal repercussions, his social standing was utterly destroyed. His name became synonymous with scandal and predatory behavior. The Hawthorne family's reputation was irrevocably tarnished, their business dealings scrutinized, and their carefully constructed world of influence began to unravel. It was a hard-won victory, but it was justice. With the legal battle behind her, Alara focused on her recovery, both physical and emotional. The pregnancy, once a source of confusion and pain, slowly began to transform into a symbol of resilience. She found strength in her mother's unwavering support, who became her rock, her confidant, and her fiercest protector. Maria moved into a small apartment with Alara, dedicating herself entirely to her daughter's well-being. They spent hours talking, processing, and healing together. Therapy played a crucial role in Alara's journey. She worked with a compassionate therapist who helped her navigate the trauma, the betrayal, and the complex emotions surrounding her impending motherhood. Support groups for survivors of sexual assault also provided a safe space where she could share her experiences and find solidarity with others who understood her pain. Slowly, tentatively, Alara began to reclaim her narrative. As her due date approached, Alara embraced her unexpected motherhood with courage and determination. The fear and confusion gradually gave way to a burgeoning sense of love and anticipation. She realized that despite the painful circumstances of its conception, the life growing within her was innocent, a new beginning. She chose to focus on the joy, the miracle of it all, rather than the darkness that preceded it. The birth of her child was a profound moment, a release of past pain and an embrace of future hope. Holding her baby for the first time, Alara felt an overwhelming surge of unconditional love. It was a love that transcended everything, a pure, untainted bond that promised a brighter future. Her child was not a reminder of what she had lost, but a testament to her strength, her ability to overcome. Alara, with her child and her mother by her side, began to build a new life for herself, one completely independent of the Hawthorns' influence. She chose to leave the city, seeking a fresh start in a quieter town where she could raise her child, away from the constant reminders of her past. She decided to go back to school, pursuing her dream of becoming a lawyer, driven by her own experience with injustice. She wanted to be a voice for others who had been silenced, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Her story, once a private agony, became a powerful testament. She started speaking at events, sharing her journey, advocating for stronger laws, and raising awareness about sexual assault and the importance of consent. Her experience, once a source of deep pain, transformed into a powerful platform for change. Alara became a respected advocate, her words resonating with countless individuals. She showed that even from the darkest of circumstances, strength and purpose could emerge. Her life became a compelling narrative of triumph over adversity, a testament to the indomitable power of the human spirit. She proved that one's past does not define their future, and that even in the face of unimaginable hardship, new beginnings are always possible. Alara's journey was far from easy, but it was a journey forged in strength, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to justice, not just for herself, but for all.